Welcome to the Generation Elevation podcast, a conscious, connected platform for those who are ready to manifest their dream life. I'm your host, Elise Riley, a former PT, now motivational speaker, igniting empowerment and transformation all across the globe. Here at Generation Elevation, we are committed to bringing you the most inspiring guests who will share their stories, wisdom, and advice to help you progress closer to living a life of your own terms. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Elevation. Today, I'm joined by special guest Holly Sinclair. Holly holds qualifications in social work, psychological science, functional diagnostic nutrition, holistic lifestyle coaching, and natural therapies. She has worked in both the space of health and wellness for functional medicine, both in fitness for the past 15 years. For the past 3 years, she has moved into the fertility space, helping women and men succeed in conception, despite being told that it would never be possible. She told herself a women's health crusader, bringing a no bullshit approach coupled with a depth of knowledge. Holly is proud to help women conquer their diagnosis and live a vibrant and fertile life. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you all today, Holly Sinclair from the Women series. Hello, Holly.
Hi, babe. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. It is nice and early today, and I'm super grateful to have you on the show. So let's just get stuck into it.
Yeah, awesome.
So Women's Health Crusader, bringing a no bullshit approach. Literally, I found your page through a recommendation of Ashley Boehm, who I did an episode with a while ago now. And I'm scrolling through your Instagram. I'm like, this girl, she is a boss lady. She has this message that is just like so powerful. And you can really see how strong you are in your message of just like, here's the truth, here's the evidence-based science, like let's cut the fluff and actually help people. So I'm curious, Holly, how did you come from, like, obviously you started in the fitness industry and now you're really working as a coach in more so natural therapies and wellness, helping people with their actual like health. I'd love to hear your story of how you've gone from that industry to where you are today.
Yeah, well, it's a long-winded story, which I'm sure many people have long-winded stories. But I guess I started in the fitness industry when I was 17 because I was definitely experiencing some addictive fitness behaviors myself when I was 17, 18. So I was sort of doing it as a client to the nth degree, and we can get into that later in terms of like how that led me into a bit of an eating disorder and a lot of mental health issues myself. But yeah, I was running a lot, I was training a lot, and the guys that I was doing that with ran a gym. And so they just offered me a part-time reception role. And I thought, yeah, this is awesome at 17, 18. And I was also nannying for another family at that time. And the mum was the CFO, I want to say, or the GM of Fernwood. And so she then also got me like a 2-day-a-week shift doing like, the 5 a.m. open to the midday Friday, like the worst gym shift ever. And nobody wants that. So I started that way. I started like working in reception at Fernwood and at a boutique gym in South Melbourne. And then just, fell in love with it. And then through my own journey of healing, so throughout my own eating disorder and my obsessive need for training, I was very fortunate to then get a job at a company called Fitline, which it's not around anymore, I don't think, but they were based in the Rialto Towers in Melbourne. And they were very progressive in the sense that that's where I first got exposed to Poliquin. I started doing my CHEK certifications. I did metabolic precision. I got exposed to Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden and, so all of the FMA, that's where I started my FMA qualifications. And I didn't know it then because I probably would have only been 21 at this point. But it's pretty unique to have exposure to that sort of learning when you're just in a boutique PT studio.
Yeah.
And because of that, I then applied for a role at a company that was opening up in Fitzroy called Fifth Element Wellness, which many people probably are familiar with now. And I ended up getting a manager role at that company. And I guess the best way to describe them was like a one-stop shop for wellness. So we were a gym, we were a sauna, we were a yoga studio, we did blood chemistry analysis, stool analysis, we had an on-site doctor, so it was a pretty amazing place to work. And I was there for 6 years. So I was there until I turned 29. And again, like further development there, I did more and more study, continued my learning with Czech Institute and Biosignature and, all of these companies that many people are familiar with. Started doing my natural therapies certification through them, learned all about blood chemistry analysis. And then, when I was 29, I decided it was time to go out on my own. And I actually started the women's series at Fifth Element. It was actually piggybacking off another series that we were running through our social media, and I can't even remember the name of it now, but that's what it started as. And I just saw opportunity for it to grow into something that could allow me to then become the authority as opposed to working for the authority, right? And I just took my opportunity and went out on my own at 29, and I'm 34 next month. So it's been 4 years now of running an online business, or 5 years of running an online business. And it's just been amazing. So I guess that's sort of how I got there.
Wow. Yes, I completely resonate with parts of your story. And I'd love to hear more about the women's series. So you have your podcast, you do your coaching. For those listeners tuning in today, could you share a little bit more about their mission behind the women's series?
I guess I just saw that women, they really lack resilience. That was mostly like where I saw potential to come in and fix a pain point, because whether they lacked resilience physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like it was just this overarching theme that I started to notice. And because I was at the age myself where many people in my life were starting to become pregnant and mothers and so forth, I just naturally gravitated to more of that reproductive health, fertility space. But like any small business, honestly, I never started the women's series with the intention of becoming a reproductive health coach or expert. It just organically sort of happened that way. It was a bit more broad when I started. But I really feel like women lacked resilience, and they lacked that ability to just, put their head down and really go to work. So I guess when I'm building my brand and, putting messages together, I hope, and I know that it's funny because I always say to my brand manager and my web dev team, every time somebody applies to work with me, there's a question in my application form that says something like, why do you want to work with Holly? And I kid you not, like 90% of the time, they will always say, because she has a no bullshit approach, which I've never actually stated anywhere that I take a no bullshit approach. But obviously that messaging comes through pretty strongly in my brand, which is always what I intended. And it's coming back to no bullshit. We do want to foster resilience. Like, women don't have to be like these fragile, vulnerable, I guess, victims. They can actually be the hero in their journey when it comes to improving their health, and specifically now, obviously, becoming mothers and improving their fertility.
Why do you think that is the case? Like, is that a societal conditioning that you believe that has impacted women in that way? Like, what do you think that is from?
Oh, that's a big question. I think there's a lot of contributing factors. I think firstly, the birth control pill played a huge role in negatively impacting the way in which our brain functions. Obviously, the way in which we tolerate hormones. People forget that when you're putting synthetic hormones into your body, that's 100% going to impact your mood and your perception and how you see the world and how you view the world. So I do think like birth control in general was probably the start of where we started to see a bit of this decline in women's like strengths and resilience. I'm going to keep using that word because I just love that word, or tenacity. So I think that's part of it. I think like the way that we eat is a really big problem, in the sense that not only do we eat shit food, so we eat all of this pro-inflammatory garbage that just continues to make our brains inflamed. And when you've got brain inflammation, that's certain to lead to constant anxiety, depression, mood disorders, and so forth. But also women don't eat enough. So women eat shit. So they might eat bread or cereal in the morning or whatever, but then it's the serve of like a sparrow. So where our brains are starving, our nervous system is starving, and our body is starving. So then when that woman gets into a gym environment, the last thing that she's going to naturally gravitate to is loading heavy. But they're the type of things that women should be doing in order to experience that physical tenacity and strength and resilience, and giving her the understanding that she is capable. So like that's the flow and effect from that. I think, yeah, definitely society's approach to women, certainly probably from the 50s to the 90s, definitely we can see through history, we can definitely say that, women needed saving, I guess. And whether that's right or wrong, it certainly has embedded this idea that we can't do things for ourselves as much as men can do things for themselves. So that's certainly a part of it. And then you see it sort of ripple through into the birth space, the pregnancy world, all of that sort of stuff, where you've got the can't talk, it's too early. Obstetric model coming in, and men telling women how to birth, and men telling women what to do, and men telling, us that we're wrong and crazy for thinking that we can push a baby out and we need saving. So like it's all of those micro scenarios that amount to, I guess, what women experience on a day-to-day basis now. And I see it all the time in clinic. Like women are just so fragile. They're so fragile. And a lot of that boils down to how they're perceiving their current situation, whether that be ill health or fertility issues or just like general health issues. It's more about their perception of it than anything that causes them to just spiral out of control. And I think beyond that, you've got broader topics or macro topics such as, we live in an EMF soup these days. So our nervous systems in general are just fried. We're constantly being poisoned by the homes that we live in, whether it be with mold or plastics or, if you live on a main road, petroleum. And so there's so many elements that can be influencing what's going on with how you're seeing the world and how your body's functioning within the world. But I think that's probably, not to drag on, but that's probably like the main crux of the issue. And then obviously you've got gut microbiome issues. And when the microbiome's off, that then becomes systemic throughout the body. And that leads to this issue called endotoxemia, which is when you've got like microtoxins present in the blood. And endotoxemia or lipopolysaccharides have been associated with every single chronic health issue in the literature. So, that plays a role. So there's so many moving parts. That's why it's important to work with a practitioner who understands this stuff, because you always have to go for then the lowest hanging fruit and then work your way back to get that person to feeling their most optimal self.
Yeah. So for the listeners who may be having or struggling with gut issues, or even on birth control, or just intuitively feeling something's not right, but also, there's this societal message that like you need to, instead of trusting yourself, it's more so like go get external, like not help or advice, but it's like constantly like believing everyone else rather than actually tuning into your own body and going, actually, you know what, something's not sitting right with me. I'm feeling really stressed, or this is not working. Like my skin's breaking out. I'm not digesting properly. I'm not sleeping properly. For the women out there that are experiencing these issues, even if it's just like blocked nose, like blocked sinuses, I found that in my journey before I started being a little bit more conscious with the specific products that I was taking and things like this, it was more, I would get really stuffy in my sinuses. So I guess for those starting out on this journey and wanting to really put more of a conscious effort towards their health, what would be your advice in regards to like tuning into your body and your own inner wisdom, and then the next step from there?
It's boring, what I'm going to say, but like the best thing that somebody can do is they need to master the basics. They need to like actually properly stick to the fundamentals of health. And I'm not saying like do it for a month. I'm saying like you need to do what I'm about to talk about for 6 months minimum before you ever judge what's happening at a physiological or psychological level. And that's the other thing, like nobody does that. What you'll see is people will just jump from practitioner to practitioner to practitioner, coach to coach to coach in a hope to, improve themselves. And to your point, they're just seeking that external validation and need for somebody else to fix them. But you have to stick to the fundamentals. So the fundamentals are sleep. Like if you don't sleep 8 hours a night, good quality sleep, poor sleep is associated with so many issues. But if we're talking specifically about women's health, certainly fertility issues are associated with poor sleep. You've got bad skin, poor digestion, energy, chronic fatigue, all the rest of it. So sleep is number one. Second is you need to eat clean foods and you need to eat enough of it. So at an absolute minimum, you should be having 2,000 calories a day, minimum. But the literature states that for a healthy menstrual cycle, the average woman should be having 2,500 calories a day. So, if we look at it like that, anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 a day should be your norm, not Michelle Bridges' 1,200.
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, that makes my heart break.
So that's what I mean by eating enough. And then the food that you do eat should just be real food. It shouldn't be packaged. It shouldn't be coming from aisle 12 at the supermarket. Like it shouldn't be able to have a shelf life of 2 years. It should be meat, veg, fruit, honey, rice, potatoes, like real food.
Yeah.
So that's the second thing. Third thing is you need to poo every day.
Yes.
So you need to make sure that your digestive health is in good order. Now, digestive health tends to piggyback off your sleep and your nutrition. So that's why those two things come first. Obviously, there's going to be scenarios where people are sleeping well and are eating well, but they still have digestive health. And that's where you do need to seek out, stool analysis and probably get to the bottom of what's going on. It could be a stealth pathogen, could be bacteria, could be, who knows. But digestion, so you need to go to the toilet every day. You need to move. That's number 4. So every single day you should be doing some form of exercise, whether that be going for an hour's walk, whether that be training at the gym for 45 minutes, doing a Pilates session, doing a yoga session, even just stretching. I don't know, but you need to move your body. You need to create blood flow. I mean, there's literature that shows that simply stretching out your fascia every day decreases tumors by 50%. So we know that movement in the fascia equals movement in the body, movement in the lymph as well. So movement's essential. And then the 5th one is hydration. You should have adequate amount of hydration coming in. And that's not just drinking 2 liters of water. That's taking your minerals, so your sodium, potassium, and magnesium as well, to ensure that your cells are properly hydrated. And like you'd be really surprised at how poor people do at those 5 points. They might do really well at the movement, but then they suck at the sleep, or they're nailing the hydration, but then they only eat 1,500 calories a day. So those are the 5 things that people need to master for a minimum of 6 months before jumping the gun to, oh, well, this is more serious and somebody else has to fix me. If you get to the point of 6 months and you've done all of those things and you're still having health issues, well, then, at that point, that's when you need to embark on the journey of working with somebody and getting to the bottom of what's driving it. But like 8 out of 10 times, you're going to find that your weird health issue will resolve itself. And that includes infertility.
Yeah. Yes. Why do you think that like some people do really well in one area and then they struggle with other areas, such as like they do really well with their training and then struggle with sleep, or vice versa? Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, life does get in the way. I'm a new mum. So, like, my sleep at the moment, it's just, I just can't sleep 8 hours. So, I definitely understand there are scenarios that's going to be out of your control. However, I think for the most part, people love self-sabotaging and they love being victims, whether that's conscious or not. Most of the time, that's not conscious.
Yeah.
So they like to stay attached to the issue at hand, whether that be their digestive issues or their chronic fatigue. Like, there is an element where they identify with that problem. So for them to actually properly commit to those fundamentals, there's probably a bit of a tug of war there with their internal identification. So I think that plays a role. Self-sabotage definitely plays a role. And that, I'm sure you would have spoken to Ash about that, but that obviously boils down to not really understanding your core needs and values and fulfilling them on a daily basis. And I also think people just don't know. Like, people are really uneducated because it's not their fault. Our mainstream media and what most people read on news.com is absolute garbage. So, if you're turning on the Today Show and they've got, I'm just going to say Michelle Bridges again, on there as the expert, well, what hope do people have?
Yeah,
really?
100%.
Yeah.
And especially going back to the birth control topic as well, like, as you go through high school, I know from my personal experience, like, they really push the hormonal contraception. So for me in my journey, I had the implant for 5 years when I was 14 onwards. And I remember getting that out actually when I moved to the Gold Coast in 2021. And it was so interesting, all of my skin issues that I'd had throughout those years completely went away. And also knowing that it wasn't just that action of getting the implant out, but it was also getting rid of the plastics, the heavy metals, and really focusing on fresh whole food, organic where I could, grass-fed meats, and just really being conscious with even things like filtered water are so important. I've done many episodes on this podcast talking about the importance of just simplicity, of filtered water, moving your body, sleeping, all of the things that you've said. So yeah, I guess that message of contraception and all of these quick fixes, it may even contribute to that lack of trust within the self and that own feminine wisdom that each and every single woman actually has, and potentially taking that away by investing into contraception and all these kinds of products and things to help fix us. It's would you say in a way that takes away from the developing that intuition with the body and that connection?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. When you disconnect with your menstrual cycle, it's pretty hard to be as one, especially as a woman. I think just quickly on the other reason why people don't stick to this stuff is because it's not quick turnaround. So, for example, if you eat grass-fed and organic food for a week, you probably aren't going to notice a difference. So that's why people don't stick to it either, because they, unlike a pill, they don't get that quick gratification from making these lifestyle changes. That's why ultimately you do have to stick to it for 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you start to reap the reward. So that's another reason as well. But yeah, in terms of intuition, there's so much that negatively impacts women and beyond birth control, right? But that's definitely a big, big player. If you shut down a girl's menstrual cycle, most teenage girls are put on the pill with it before they've even had more than 4 natural cycles, right? So I think the average is once she has her 3rd cycle, most teenage girls are sent to the GP and put on birth control pills. So, really it's that you don't experience your menses at all. And for majority of those women, they don't go off those contraceptions until they're wanting to start a family. So that could be 15, 20 years of just suppressing and downregulating all of those natural, beautiful hormones that the body produces to make us who we are. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's definitely part of what negatively impacts our intuition for sure.
It's really interesting as I hear you speak, because for my journey as well, I remember when I was younger and being on the implant and completely my period disappeared altogether. And it was for me at the time, I rejected the feminine, and I hated being a girl. I hated it. I was like, if I can skip my period and like I don't have to worry about it, and this is the best thing ever. And it's really interesting as I've gone through this personal development journey, learned about mindset, the subconscious mind, and healing those patterns of, per se, that led me to want to reject that part of myself. And now coming to that space where I'm accepting the feminine within me and really embracing that. Like, I see like having a cycle as such a beautiful thing, and almost like appreciation for that opportunity to be a woman in this life. It's such an interesting contrast whereby, like, yeah, I feel, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, however, like in my experience, and maybe other people have experienced this as well, like there's such a heavy push towards contraception and like, you know, periods and all these kinds of things being so taboo, sexual health and reproductive health being so taboo, that like there's this rejection, and therefore like people don't really come to that acceptance until they're wanting to be pregnant and start a family, and then go, oh shit, like I've just pumped my body with all these hormones for the past couple of years, and now I have to do this healing process back from the start.
Well, a lot of women don't even get to that point. But you see the damage of birth control playing out now, because look at our IVF rates. So
what are the rates, Holly?
1 in 6 couples use IVF in Australia, and 1 in 25 children at the moment is born via IVF. I actually just read a paper that came out of the States. So these are American statistics, but I would imagine it's quite similar to Australia, where they had 390,000 couples and or people use IVF last year, and they only had 79,000 live births. So that put the return on investment at about 28%, which is fucking atrocious when you think about how much money people pay. And the reality is it's not even at a 50% success rate.
Yeah,
it's 20, yeah, it's like a huge gamble, right? But you see, like, if we're specifically just talking about the more spiritual, emotional aspect of the womb and how birth control has impacted that, you see it play out massively in fertility at the moment. I mean, maybe it's because I'm in this space, but IVF has just exploded in the last decade. You know, 20 years ago, to go through IVF at the rate that most people go through it now just wouldn't have happened. Yeah. And so much of people who use IVF don't need to be using it. Like, it's an astronomical amount of users really don't need it in order to allow them to become pregnant. Ultimately, the only people that really need IVF are those that have structural abnormalities. So that could be things like blocked fallopian tubes. It could be adhesions such as Asherman syndrome, retrograde menses. Like, they're ultimately the only women that need that assisted reproductive technology, because they just honestly can't conceive naturally due to the structural abnormality. But that only accounts for, I think, across the board, it only accounts for 23% of all infertility cases is structural abnormalities. So the thing that counts for the most infertility in women is ovulatory disorders, which is at 25%. And PCOS is leading the charge there at 11%. So PCOS is the number one cause of fertility issues in women, and that's 100% reversible. Yes. 100%. It's a metabolic disorder. It's like, why are those women embarking on IVF? I mean, to me, it's negligent. It's negligent of the IVF system and doctors to even allow somebody with PCOS to walk through their door and go, yeah, sure, let's just get you on the table. Let's do some rounds, 10 grand a pop, see how we go. It's like, what are you talking about? Just send that woman home with some inositol, magnesium, berberine, and a low-carb paleo diet, and she'll conceive in 4 or 5 cycles, you know, but it doesn't make money.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I had full goosebumps just then. Like, my journey as a personal trainer, when I was doing that a few years ago, like, many women would come to me with PCOS or endometriosis. And it's funny that was going to be my next question for you, is like, yeah, what would be your advice for those people, like having obviously the low carb paleo diet and supplements and things like this, and knowing that, I guess, maybe if they are wanting to conceive and they have been told by doctors or medical professionals that it's impossible or that it can't be done, what would be your advice to these women?
Yeah. Well, I got told that myself when I was 22, 23, that I'd never be able to conceive. Lol. So, like PCOS and endo are obviously two different things. Endometriosis is more of a like dysregulated immune condition, heavy association with the microbiome, xenoestrogens. There's huge correlation between glyphosate and endometriosis. In fact, if you look in the literature, you see almost like this one-for-one growth with when agriculture started using glyphosate at a very high rate and the rates of endometriosis. So we know that there's like a really big environmental factor with endometriosis as well. And that's also confirmed by the fact that we've seen it in men, we've seen it in babies, we've seen it in postmenopausal women. So it's not just impacting baby-making reproductive women. So there's definitely, that's probably where I would be putting your focus if you had endo first and foremost. And then with PCOS, like we said, that's metabolic. So insulin resistance, elevated androgens. I mean, if you don't have elevated androgens on your blood panels, you don't have PCOS. It's that simple. So if you've been diagnosed with PCOS via just an ultrasound, you actually need to go and push for your testosterone and your insulin, not your glucose, your insulin to be tested on a blood panel, because if your androgen's not elevated, you don't have it. And that's something that happens a lot as well. Women get diagnosed really, really poorly just off that ultrasound. But you could have, I mean, the cysts that they show on ultrasound, they're not cysts, they're just your follicles and eggs. And the count of that can change from month to month. So 1 month you might have an abundant amount of follicles on your right ovary, maybe it's like 17 or 18. But then the next month, if you went back and got the same ultrasound, you might only have 10. And then the month after that, you might have 12. And then the month after that, you might have 5. So it changes month to month. So you can't just use that as a diagnostic tool. In order to get diagnosed with PCOS, you have to have elevated androgens, elevated insulin, elevated cysts on an ultrasound, and amenorrhea. You have to have a cycle that lasts beyond 45 days. But knowing all of that doesn't matter, because the crux of the issue is that you need to clean up your lifestyle. And that's what's led to the polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is, it's a syndrome is just another word that doctors use when they basically mean, I don't know what's wrong with you. You see that in irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Anything with syndrome means, oh, we actually don't know what's going on. So yeah, and then like you need to reverse engineer what's causing that inflammatory load on the body. And the same goes for endometriosis. There's a lot of inflammation involved, a lot of issues with something called prostaglandin 2, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine, which is where that pain comes from with women with endo. But, you know, even prostaglandin 2 is a metabolic byproduct of omega-6 consumption. So if we're talking about nutrition with endo, we know that just simply improving their consumption of omega-3 and omega-9 and lowering their consumption of omega-6 can dramatically improve their pain each and every cycle. So there are many, many things that you can do that don't require you to conceive a baby via IVF. And the thing is as well, if you still choose to go down the IVF route, but you don't bother to improve your lifestyle and you've been diagnosed with PCOS, we know that your outcomes are way worse in IVF. But if you make the effort to get as minimally inflamed as possible, enrich the ovaries with antioxidants, drop your oxidative stress levels, go on a bit of a lower carb. I'm not saying no carbs, but just kind of consume rice and potatoes as opposed to pastas and breads. It dramatically improves your IVF outcome. So, you know, why aren't women being told that? Because if I'm going to go in and pay, well, the average amount of pay cycle at IVF is $33,000. That's the average. Some women pay up to 100 grand. Sorry, couples pay up to 100 grand. Some pay less. But if I'm going to go and spend $35,000 in order to have a baby, I'd fucking want to make sure that I was going to get that outcome.
Yeah.
You know, so why wouldn't that community tell you at that first consult, hey, let's go ahead with this, but go away and make an effort to get healthier so that your outcome is better. You know why? Because they have KPIs. Like, we know this. There's a famous case of a doctor called Dr. Lynn Burmeister, and she was a whistleblower at Monash IVF. She had to take her practice to Geelong because she got banned from practicing in Melbourne after she whistle blew on the fact that on average, the Monash IVF, they have to have 6 cycles per client.
Wow.
That's their KPI. So do they really have your best interest at heart, or are they just there to make money? Like, let's get real. Let's like call a spade here. Yeah. People like to say, oh, Holly, you're just crazy. Like, it's like, but this is reality. Like, now Lynn Burmeister practices out of East Melbourne now, and she has one of the best success rates in IVF because she's not there to just make money. She's there to actually provide you with the outcome that you want. Mm-hmm. So you got to shop around as well if you're going to go through the IVF scenario, but that's off topic to PCOS and endo. But hopefully that answers some questions.
Yeah, that's perfect. And for those listening, I'm curious to know, with clients in particular for you, Holly, what have been some like high inflammatory foods or behaviors that people would engage in that they didn't actually realize was negatively impacting them? Like, is there any foods or in particular that were surprising to clients, or usually are surprising to clients when you tell them like they're quite high inflammatory?
I think gluten's probably the main one. Mm-hmm. A lot of people do consume a lot of gluten. But by the time somebody's coming to me, they usually have a pretty good nutritional literacy, I've got to say. It's pretty rare that I meet someone now in a private setting where they're just like eating Maccas every day. Like, that's not really a scenario I work with anymore. But yeah, I think gluten is probably the main one that, we know that gluten is associated with elevated thyroid antibodies, and thyroid antibodies certainly can impact fertility because they increase ovarian antibodies. Now, if you go and get your thyroid tested as a preconceptive blood test, they're not going to test your antibodies. They test your thyroid stimulating hormone, which is a pretty nothing marker anyway. So you could be, and I've had many clients like this where they actually had hypothyroidism. Some have actually had undiagnosed Hashimoto's, and they'd been trying for months to get pregnant and nothing was happening, or multiple miscarriages, and no one could give them any answers. And it's like, well, you've got autoimmunity of the thyroid, and gluten is one of the worst proteins to drive that autoimmunity up. So stuff like that. Obviously, alcohol's terrible for your ovaries. Even if you're just having 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, you probably want to give that up. But beyond that, no, there's not really many surprises.
One of the ladies from a summit that I went to in Melbourne mentioned that in regards to endometriosis and these fertility issues, that there was a statistic saying that 70% of women that experience endo have suffered with some level of trauma. Now, I'd love to hear your opinion or your professional advice on this in regards to like, what is the, I guess, association with your mindset and the manifestation of these like inflammatory responses in the body?
Yeah, well, the body keeps the score. So that paper that you're talking about, they actually surveyed 75,000 women with endo, and they found that 79% of them had sustained some form of sexual assault or trauma. So yeah, it's a pretty damning statistic, and I think it's very relevant, and it's part of the puzzle when you're working to improve your endometriosis. It's not all of it, but it's definitely part of the puzzle that as a practitioner you need to take into consideration. Has this person experienced any trauma to the womb? And, the body keeps the score. How that manifests is going to be different in everybody. But I think, it's very significant, and we shouldn't neglect it. We see there's a study called the Yehuda study, which is a famous study where the researcher is called something Yehuda. I should remember her first name, but she's a woman out of New York, and she looked at PTSD levels in second generation born Jewish New Yorkers. So their grandparents would have gone through the Holocaust, and found significantly higher amounts of PTSD present in them than those whose grandparents hadn't gone through the Holocaust. And effectively what the research highlighted was that intergenerational trauma is also a big part of somebody's healing journey and somebody's ill health. So there's so many things that we have to look at. There's a great book by a guy called Mark Wolin Oh, I'm going to forget the name of it. I think it's called something like It Didn't Start With You. I feel like
Yes,
that's
I read that. It's amazing.
yeah. So that's if anyone's interested in that in this stuff, that's probably a good book. The book actually is somewhat like you get to go in and you can workshop your own experiences
Yeah,
and
it's great.
yeah, it's a really good book. But like intergenerational trauma is huge. And I actually had a girlfriend, this is years ago. She went through IVF. She has endometriosis and went through IVF, but she was having all of these issues. I can't really remember the story too much because it's so long ago, but I was reading the book at the time, the Mark Wallen book, and I asked her, like, what's your fertility lineage like? Like, what's the stories? And she was telling me that her grandmother had multiple stillbirths.
Mm.
And I just wonder, like, I wonder if that's playing a role in what's happening with her and her endometriosis and her inability to conceive. You're never going to fully know, but I think it's worth highlighting these things.
Yeah, I think if you're going to go all in with something like this, it's important to have the foundational mind, body, and soul approach. And that's essentially like what I do with clients, not so much specializing in reproductive health and conceiving, but more just so increasing performance and general well-being. It's so important to like get your nutrition, your exercise routine right, your sleep right, make sure you get your mindset right, and then like using mindfulness techniques such as meditation and journaling, all these kinds of things to help you feel just good and better in general. So you can be the best version of yourself, whether you're wanting to conceive or just live a healthier life.
Yeah, well, conscious conception is very important. I mean, so many people, that's the other thing. So many people go into becoming parents and they don't actually think about becoming the parent.
Mm.
Like, it's almost like people are kind of just ticking a box. And it's like they, especially now, you see so many people going through this struggle of IVF and, taking months upon years to conceive. And then they get to the parent part and it's like, did you actually really think about how you were going to parent, how you're going to raise this child? I've got a colleague, a good friend of mine, Kimberly Peters, who was on my podcast. She's a womb masseuse and she often talks about like the esoteric element of conception and how, when you're in that phase of trying to conceive, like your baby's soul is orbiting constantly around you. It's just whether or not it's the right time for it to come into the physical realm, but you can call in those souls and you can sort of speak to those souls. And that's the conscious conception element. And it's really disappointing, to be honest, like seeing people become parents and have no regard for what that actually means, because that then, you probably work more in the space of like breaking a lot of these like limiting beliefs and behavior patterns.
Yeah, 100%.
This is why people have those problems though, because it all starts with the first 7 years of life, as Bruce Lipton says. Yeah. Like you're in effectively a hypnotic state. So
yeah,
if you don't like nurture that child, securely attach that child, love that child, conscious of what you say to that child, like you can set that person up for so many issues later on in adulthood. And people like laugh at my husband and I because we're hyper conscious of what we say to our son. But I'm glad that I'm hyper conscious of that. Like we don't even say to him, good boy, because we don't want him to have any form of like judgment associated with his actions. We'll say things like, you did it. Like what, you got there, right? But it's about reframing how you speak to children so that they feel like independent, loved, and attached. And fucking nobody really puts that much effort into their parenting, unfortunately.
Yeah. And like something that I heard on your podcast too, the conscious conception and really like connecting with your baby's soul before they are born. Like I think that is so important. And one of my clients at the moment is pregnant. So we've been doing lots of meditations together and like helping her connect with her baby girl that's coming through in a few months. And it's just the most powerful sessions. Like I can't even begin to describe how powerful they are. And like if anyone listening to this today can get anything from this podcast, it's just to go back to the foundations of just making sure you're hitting all of like your like health targets with nutrition, training, then also connecting with yourself and your own intuition, making sure you're decreasing your stress, making sure you're connecting with yourself, with other people in your community who are going to help you and that are going to support you on this journey, because it's such an empowering place to be in when you get to choose to bring another soul into this world rather than just like go off whim with it, or go through such a hard journey of trying and struggling with IVF when these situations, these hardships can be easily avoided.
And you hear it all the time. You hear it all the time. Oh, our first child was IVF, or we'd been doing IVF for 10 months and nothing happened. And then we decided, fuck it, we'll just go on a holiday. Like, we can't handle it anymore. Go on a holiday, no stress. Oh, conceived. You hear those stories all the time.
Yeah.
And these are people who have been told, oh, you're never going to be able to conceive. But it just highlights how important it is to, put your nervous system into a position where it feels safe, it feels calm, you've slept.
Yeah.
You're having sex and you want to have sex, you're intimate with your partner in a loving and deep, sensual way. Like, wow, who would have fucking thought that would create a baby, But I think, I didn't mention at the start with the fundamentals. One of the other fundamentals is mindfulness. So you have to be conscious for sure.
Yeah. And I guess to finish it off there, Holly, what would be your 3 tips for becoming conscious, especially as you start your journey into becoming a parent yourself?
God, that's a big question. 3 tips. Definitely, I think if you're on the TTC journey, so trying to conceive, or if you've just recently become pregnant, you got to remember that it's not just about the birth. You are about to have a child in your life for a minimum 18 years living at your home. So read up on parenting, like really find some good resources about, what does it mean to be a securely attached parent? What type of parent do you want to be? Like, we were very conscious that we wanted to take a gentle parenting approach. That's not the approach that everyone's going to take, but be aware of what type of parent you want to be. There's so many good resources out there. So that would be a first step. I think, to your point, definitely committing to your mindfulness. I did a lot of Joe Dispenza while I was pregnant.
Yes, love it. Love it.
Yeah, a lot. And like his morning meditation, that I think that's just called morning meditation. It goes for about 25 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would just be like constantly weeping every time I did that meditation.
Wow.
But yeah, mindfulness is really important, getting out and about. And then nourishment. Like, if we're talking specifically about fertility, you're trying to grow another human.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need to nourish your body. You need to have like strong blood. You need to have lots of minerals and nutrients present.
Yeah.
So that requires you to eat well, eat enough, move your body, and sleep.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And Holly, where can my listeners find you if they want to tune into the Women's Series or work with you one-on-one?
Yeah, so I'm just the Women's Series on Instagram, the Women's Series on YouTube, and thewomensseries.com if you want to work with me there.
Amazing. And Holly, I have one last question for you today before I let you go. Now, I ask all of my guests this, and I am just after the first thing that comes to your mind, the first thing that you can channel through for us that comes present in your intuition. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It doesn't have to resonate with anything that we've spoken about today as well. It's just that first thing.
Okay.
So my question is, if you could tune into what you believe the collective, these people listening to my podcast right now today, the listeners, what do you believe that they need to hear right now?
I don't even know if I want to say the first thing that comes to mind.
Tell us, come on.
You just need to fucking get on with it. You just need to put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward. I have a very David Goggins mindset. Like, like you are your own your own enemy in this instance a lot of the time. So you just got to keep moving forward. Even if it's slow, you just got to keep moving forward. That's the main thing.
Keep moving forward. I love it. I love it, Holly. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll definitely connect again soon. Thanks again.
For sure. Thanks, babe.
Thank you for being a part of the Generation Elevation community. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a 5-star rating, written review, share, and tag me on Instagram at elise.riley. Until next time, keep loving, keep learning, and keep rising.